There needs to be a shift in mindset. For instance, in the gym space or working out space, it's like, why do you do it? Do you do it to look good? Because you need a bit of extra validation maybe? Or do you want to feel good? Or do you want a combination of both?
Recently, I read this new research around the US, and if you just got 30% of the population of the US to walk 10,000 steps a day, it's going to improve the life expectancy in our country by 4 years.
The UK is always behind, 5, 6, 7 years behind the US in many ways. And I think that the best idea is to not integrate things until they've been proven to work for a few years before doing so. Otherwise, we've got a whole database of guinea pigs opposed to people that are actually having the result.
Tim, we are thrilled to have you at PerformX Live. I'm thrilled to be speaking to you. We've got a ton of questions, but we only have 45 minutes. So just to get started, how do you kind of define this industry and your role in it?
Firstly, thanks for having me. This industry is growing very, very quickly. And I think, one of the positive things that came out of COVID actually was the awareness of how we should be looking after ourselves. And I think people like Brian Johnson, John Gray, Ben Greenfield, and even people like the Liver King. Those of you that know of the Liver King, if you don't, you should look up this crazy dude. But bringing awareness to this space is amazing because some of these things are so easy to implement, and a lot of these things we can be doing in our day-to-day without even, actually adding much time or taking much time to do so. Extreme people like Brian Johnson, for instance, going to the absolute extreme gives us an idea of how far we can go and what we can achieve, even though I think that has negative impacts on your own mental health. So I think there are good and bad things that you can take from all of these people in the space. I like to think I'm not quite that extreme, but I do like to experiment with a few things, but make sure that I have the fundamentals nailed first, which makes it significantly more easy to access for everyone else, I would say.
You mentioned the fundamentals, and we had a bit of a chat as we were coming in here. Give us a little bit of background on what brought you into, I'll use the word biohacking, but what was your background and what particularly interested you as a professional in this kind of new developing area?
Well, I didn't know anything about biohacking or health optimization or any of these things at all back in 2012, something like that. And it was when I got ill and the doctors shrugged their shoulders and said, we can't find anything wrong, that I realized actually there's got to be another way. And this is when, forums would share about things that people been testing and talking about the microbiome that was really early days in terms of testing and, what you could do. And I started noticing that there are so many areas in the medical world that they had no idea actually how to be healthy. They just knew how to fix issues some of the time with medicines. So really it was just through self-experimenting with various supplements or various different things, like even down to liver flushes, which controversial but amazing. I realized that there's, preventative healthcare or longevity, and then there was sickness care. Obviously, that's evolved into functional medicine and all these different areas now. So it was just through a place of necessity of going from being a high performer running, a multi-million-pound e-commerce company to not being able to leave the house and asking my mum to take me to the doctors because I couldn't drive because I was so sick. So it's kind of like if the medical world and the fitness world were working completely on its own, we wouldn't have a need for something else. And that's where biohacking or health optimization or longevity, whichever label you want to give it, fits in. It's kind of like fixing that piece that needs fixing right now.
Well, there's so much good coming out of the healthcare system. Even in the US and the UK, we've got some of the most advanced healthcare systems in the world, but they've been really designed and built to fix a problem at a specific point of intervention, and they're very good at that. But they know very, little about how you got there and also what happens after that. So they're great at one point. I think to go back and change that is going to take decades. And in the meantime, we want to have incremental changes to live longer. I think there's a lot of good research coming out. Recently, I read this new research around the US, and if you just got 30% of the population of the US to walk 10,000 steps a day, it's going to improve the life expectancy in our country by 4 years. That is remarkable. So when people think about biohacking, to me, we just took some methylene blue outside. I want to get into that in a minute. I'm feeling okay so far, a bit more wired. But sometimes it's not that. It's not the cold plunges. It's something as simple as biohacking could be, can you find a few minutes in your day to go out, right? So do you view that the same way as well?
Yep, that's what I call the fundamentals of health. So there's a doctor with 210 IQ called Dr. Ten Akakoso. He's incredible man. He came up with a list of a saying, really, is the prescription for optimal health is eat well, sleep well, hydrate well, sun well, ground well, live well, fuck well, and move well. And it's basically like, if you're not scoring an 8 or plus on any one of those things, why are you doing technologies or taking supplements? You should just have the fundamentals nailed first. The thing is saying, do you eat well, sleep well, move well? That's not necessarily sexy or marketable. And therefore, it doesn't necessarily get the momentum that, a methylene blue tongue would get. And it's not got the virality of it. Although that's where 90% of the wins come from. In fact, I went to a longevity retreat in Chennai, India, back in February last year. And there was a room of probably 40 pro biohackers all together. And I ran through this list of a potential 120 points on 12 metrics. Score yourself on 1 to 10. So of 120 points, the average score was 38. Of pro biohackers, one of which was taking nearly 70 supplements a day. I question whether that's a pro or not. So the point is if you're not doing all the fundamentals, why are you doing the rest of it? It's just wasting time or having fun. So it's like, I think that there needs to be a shift in mindset. For instance, in the gym space or working out space, it's like, why do you do it? Do you do it to look good? Because, you need a bit of extra validation maybe? Or do you want to feel good? Or do you want a combination of both? So taking these supplements or doing a lot of these technologies might not necessarily help you hit that goal. And in fact, if you are doing the fundamentals and the rest, you could actually hit your goal significantly more, but you're just not aware of them. So I think incorporating these things into day-to-day life, for instance, the trainer saying, what was your sleep score last night? Or, have you hydrated before your sauna session? Because otherwise you're probably going to get a headache and be fatigued this afternoon, which means your productivity for work goes down, which means you're not a high performer. I can't think of a time when a trainer has actually ever asked me any of these things, let alone a doctor.
Do you think the word biohacker attracts the wrong kind of attention? Because when you think of hacks, it's shortcuts, and you have a very practical approach. You gave the basic things that we should all be doing, and there's obviously all the stuff around the fringes that gets the attention, that gets the visibility on social media, but also it gets a lot of criticism, because in a lot of cases we're trying things and experimenting with stuff which hasn't really been tested and can arguably do a lot more harm than good. But with what you're doing, very sort of straightforward approach, things that we should all be doing. How do you get that balance from creating this identity of being some kind of hacker that's really putting people's lives at risk, from the fundamentals that are really going to make a meaningful difference, and avoid sort of attracting that sort of, that fringe negative view on what you're actually doing?
So I think in statistics, I'm a data guy, I would say. And there's a book I read, which is Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. It's about literally thinking in statistics. So for instance, when I had very few followers on Instagram, I would occasionally get a bit of hate for being a biohacker. Now I have probably 250,000 more followers, maybe 300,000. So let's say 3 times the amount of followers. Do I get 3 times the amount of hate? No, I don't. So I think if I look at the stimulus as in maybe 50 hate pieces a week, that's quite a lot of stimulus. But when you look in the statistics of it, actually it's very little compared to how many people are actually looking at this content. So my point for saying that is biohacking is a label, a very easily marketed label that differentiates a space. However, longevity, functional medicine, health optimization, all of these things are pretty much the same thing. The only difference is a biohacker fits probably a little bit more of a data mindset than the others. So I think someone that hates on it hates on it because of the label, not because they don't understand actually what it is. As we were talking yesterday, it's like, is it 30% of people wear some sort of tracker that are in the gym? So for instance,
Yes, yeah.
30% of people. So 30% of people are actually biohacking in some form. Or someone that is stressed with work that goes and does yoga once a week is biohacking in some form, because it's a systems thinking approach. So if they're hating on it, they're hating on the label, or they're hating on it because of the extreme. And yet, again, we need that extreme to show us what's possible, because once upon a time, someone took methylene blue and said, they must be crazy. Now we know it's okay to do it, and actually it has such a great impact, but we needed that extreme person to take it in the first time for it to grow awareness.
Are your members frustrated by long lines for squat racks? Equipment like squat racks are in high demand. There's a new solution that will allow your clients to train all the major muscle groups, reduce wait time, and improve your overall gym's efficiency. Curious to know more? Then contact us today.
I think so much of that kind of goes back to, it's almost like religion or culture, when you've been raised to believe that institutions are inherently good and institutions inherently have your best interest at heart. I mean, I could speak, to us coming from the US, we certainly don't look at big pharma or hospitals or health insurance. They're not incentivized to have us be healthy, because then we're not going to be using their product. The institutions, which the healthcare industry is one of the largest in the world, really monetizes by you being unwell. And if you come back, just like if your car breaks down all the time, you will be more profitable. So the incentive system has to switch. But you're also, people like you and us, we're kind of going up against this mega large industry, because the general population over decades and decades has learned to trust their GP or their primary care doctor as a trusted source of truth. But in reality, when you go to med school in the US, you only get about 4 hours of education on nutrition. That is it. That is it. And this person is now going to educate us around how to eat. And unfortunately, the general population still views them as a source of trust. Why do you think our health institutions today are still viewed as this trustworthy source, when, to me, they provide a service, certain services very well, but then when it comes to preventative care and longevity, they might not be best suited?
Money. I mean,
that's simple. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really that simple. For instance, my friend, one of our speakers, Gary Brecker, for instance, was, as I mentioned yesterday, a mortality statistician, and he worked for the insurance companies, underwriting people's lives to know how much they should be charging them based on risk. And the data that they saw was significantly different to the data that the pharmaceutical industry said. Now, if you think about the two financial biases here, bias to selling pharmaceuticals, bias to keeping people alive, or risk analysis of them. And the one thing, this is one thing that he said that really has stuck with me when we recorded together, was the number one predictor of shortened life length by 50% was no or poor relationships. 50% for expected life expectancy cut in half. Okay? Now, when they're looking at people with high cholesterol, what do you think the data said? They had a longer life expectancy with higher cholesterol. And yet the pharmaceutical industry would have us believe that if you're not taking your statins, then you're not going to live longer. The data showed different. So if you look at the financial bias, you have to say, well, what's my best judgment about this? And then when you look into the data within statins, for instance, Dr. Asima Holcher talks about it, and it gives you an expected 4 extra days life from taking a pretty much lifelong prescription of statins for all the side effects that go with it. So to answer your question, financial bias. And doctors are trained in a medical system, not in a health system, that's funded by pharmaceutical. And I think with politics aside to 1 second, what the awareness that's happening at the moment with MAHA and RFK is bringing awareness. Actually, there's another way of looking at this and shifting the financial bias somewhat. So I think as time goes on, more and more people realize that they're stuck with issues that isn't being solved, that they're not doing enough with preventative, they're doing enough with clearing up the mess. Clearing up the mess isn't working, and they're just on more and more meds. So it's just a matter of time until it unfolds. And I think if I look back over the last 12 years of my career in this space, or learning in this space, it's creeping in, and it's going quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker until mainstream fitness events are talking about biohacking and the future of biohacking. And that's where it's come from no one knowing to getting mainstream.
I think one of the things you mentioned there was about cholesterol. I recently had my blood test, reasonably high cholesterol, and I spoke to a few people, got a couple of opinions, and apparently it's almost like a seesaw where if you're overweight, high cholesterol is bad. If you're in the right weight, it could actually be good depending on what your diet is. And so what I can't help thinking is that some of these things that come out can be good dependent on the information that you've got and how educated you are. My guess is many of the people in the room today are involved. They have their own companies, they have to have their own insurance, and they face a lot of litigation if what they say or what their employees say is incorrect. How do we avoid people, going to conferences, reading some information, maybe not spending long enough? Like, you can criticize, or we can criticize doctors, but they have spent a lot of time studying a particular field and have a certain amount of knowledge, where in a lot of cases as an industry, we'll go to conferences, we'll pick up some information, and we're talking to clients. So to avoid us getting put into this bracket, particularly as the fitness industry, that can do so much good to people, but to avoiding putting us in a bracket where we can be accused of scamming people or injuring people, and many top podcasters are sort of facing this at the moment. How do we ensure that we're experimenting and being progressive, but also making sure that we stay the right side of credibility, so we're not doing more harm than good?
Brilliant question. I like this one, because why do we have doctors in the first place? Because they're a heuristic for us to not have to learn everything medical, so that when we have a problem, we can go to them. Okay? Why do we hire an accountant? It's a heuristic for us to go to so that we don't have to learn to do all of this stuff. It's the same with everyone around us. And, if we're building companies or clinics or gym groups or podcasts, we have to understand how to leverage other people to help us get to our goal, which helps them get to their goal as well. Okay? So a big part of it is understanding that you should pick the best heuristics that you can to help you on your goal. For instance, I listen to leading experts such as Gary or Aseem Malhotra or whoever, whatever, just a bit like Joe Rogan does, I guess. He looks for the best person on the planet for a topic, bar none. So why would you pick someone that wasn't as good? But then you have to use your better judgment to say, well, actually, is this information the best? What does it compare to the other people I've heard talk about this topic? And what is the financial bias in this? And so really it comes down to common sense. And I think, these days, I hate to say this quote, but common sense isn't that common. So I think we have a responsibility to talk about the most up-to-date, trustworthy information we can find, opposed to a Yahoo blog on something or other, or some guy chatting on Reddit about taking methylene blue, for instance, because that's high risk, maybe high reward. So I would say find the best source for everything. But the thing is, it's really difficult, because I was having a conversation with someone the other day about this, and it's like, how do you know who to trust? For instance, I was sent this quote on relationships by a colleague of mine, and I said, this is super interesting, and yet for someone that doesn't know anything about psychology, reading this quote could make them think their partner's a narcissist. And if they don't understand what a narcissist is, then they would just take this on face value right now, and they would then accuse their partner of being a narcissist. And you can apply this to health or any topic, obviously. It's like social media clips or content is all this information instilled into one quote to get you to click on it, and then people make decisions based on it. So I think it is partly an awareness piece, but it's also a psychology piece, because people don't click on stuff that's not appealing and then they don't act on it. It's a bit of a convoluted answer, but I think, really pick your heuristic carefully and who you're going to listen to.
And I think looking at that, looking at who the trusted source is shifting away from doctors when it comes to preventative care, because again, there's all types of doctors, different levels of experience, and a lot of it is coming into fitness centers and gyms and equipment. And when I look at fitness centers, you've been in the industry for 25, 30 years. I've been in it for about 13 years. They've had equipment, treadmills. They've had scanners like InBody, Evol's a newer one. eGym is one that's doing some Technogym. So they've had devices and ways to capture things. MyZone is very popular here in the UK and in the US. They've been capturing the data, but it wasn't viewed from a biohacking sense. And I don't know if the fitness industry particularly knew how to leverage that data. So you had consumers using it, but the consumers that used it were on the fringes, right? So the ones that would go get their in-body scan, it wasn't 80% of the gym member population. It was less than 10%. In most cases, it's less than 5% that would go do it. However, a much larger percentage of population is now coming in, like we all have rings on, with their wearable data, with whatever. But how do gyms learn to read and leverage data from what consumers are bringing in? Because a lot of the assessments are not happening at the point of intervention, like come in once a month when you first join the gym and do an in-body scan. I don't place a lot of value on that. Nothing against in-body, it's just that it's a behavioral thing. But why would you not look at, like, we just opened up my Aura app outside and said, how did you sleep last night? That to me is a lot more meaningful because you could be prescriptive about how to deal with where you are today.
Okay, so personal training. It needs to be more personal because, I've worked with a few trainers and some of them, they just want to get you running through the list, get you doing your stuff and then out. Or you have one that you work with, almost like your barber. You have a great relationship with a good PT. And it's like, well, actually, if he actually cares and it's the personal in it, you can actually have this boots on the ground integrated. But it starts with, for instance, especially if it's a big gym group, it's very difficult to look after the numbers of all of this stuff on a daily basis. So I think it starts with the trainer having this awareness. Because, for instance, look at the trend of ice baths, for instance. And again, that's prescriptive, obviously, but my trainer loves ice baths, loves saunas. It's perfect for him. Therefore, his clients like sauna and ice bath. So if you're able to educate your trainers to be personal trainers opposed to just trainers, then you can make a difference to all of your members. Now, obviously, not everyone has a trainer every time they work out, granted. However, if you get that at the onboarding and you say to someone, look, based on the data we know from our clients, that they hit their goals of, say, an extra 8 kilos or whatever it may be, twice as quick by doing this up front. Do you want to make your time more effective? Or do you just want to come in? And it's like, if you stack the value up front, again, we're value-driven creatures. Everyone's thinking, what's in it for me? Sitting in on this talk, what's in it for me? What am I going to learn that can maybe help me with my goal? And it's like, if you can specify that value up front of you will get this by doing this, people are going to be far more motivated. For instance, on the aesthetic side of things, of bodybuilding specifically, whenever I'm in the gym, I see guys that are obviously significantly bigger than me, looking in the mirror, doing their flex, looking at their pump and going, yeah, that's their feedback. That's their data to know that they're achieving their goal. Now, if we can program these guys to say, well, actually, you're hitting your goal significantly quicker, so you are actually healthier and you're growing quicker, and that's going to help you hit your goals. Why wouldn't they do it? Because that's their motivation. So you can make this motivation.
And I would also add it's good business, right? So we know that if you do that in-body assessment, you get more people to do it, you retain them more. Mm-hmm. If you integrate with wearables, you retain them more. If you engage them more in personal training, you retain them more. And just some numbers for the audience, it costs on average, these are US numbers, about $300 to acquire a new member and only $80 to retain them. So these practices are actually good business, and it's going to help improve health outcomes as well. I want to just go one step further around how do you dispel the myth between like what is fact and science. You are focused a lot on data, but there are so many influencers out there. We were talking about cold plunges yesterday, and people want to cold plunge every day, right? But the new data is showing that that might not be the best for you.
We all look very similar. You know, we're humans. We're all wired very similarly, but yet we all work so different. For instance, one drug might work for someone and one drug might not work for someone else, or even different times of the day. And I think, for instance, if we're talking about the ice bath, for instance, for me, it doesn't really help me at all. In fact, it sets me back every time, nearly every time. Whereas for someone that may be overweight or wanting to cut or has excess body fat, it's brilliant prescriptively. And I think that ties in the same with sauna. Sauna is something that most people can do, but if they don't know the nuances, such as hydrating properly before and after, then it hits their performance. So I think a big part of it is not just jumping on a trend when it's at its peak, like the keto trend. Everyone jumped on it. Quite a lot of people didn't work too well with it. Some people did. It's about what works for you and testing on yourself to some extent. Again, it comes down to heuristics. For instance, I followed the bulletproof coffee diet for quite some time, but as an ectomorph that finds it very difficult to put weight on, I just got thinner and thinner and thinner. I got down to 59 kilos until one day I looked at a photo and I was just like, there's nothing left of me. You know, now, so the point is for Dave Asprey, for instance, bulletproof coffee as someone that was overweight is fantastic. It's just like, I think the expression of, would you take financial advice from a homeless person? You know, take advice from someone that's in the position you want to be in. And I think that's probably the best heuristic in this regards.
So with many of the people here having businesses though, and I know you've got an event and you bring people together, you teach a lot of this stuff, but businesses are about processes, standards, frameworks. With so much of this being experimental, like you gave the example of bulletproof coffee, you know, I've tried that. It took you some time to personally test that out and then come to a conclusion that it wasn't right for you. Maybe it's right for somebody else. You know, where do we sort of, in businesses, you know, where do we draw the line? You know, is this something that you're thinking about and you're helping individuals and trainers to kind of, you know, almost like as you climb a mountain, give them a solid footing to stand on before we move forward? Because we can't be experimenting with people in the same way as, I guess, an influencer biohacker does. What are your thoughts on that? And is this something that you're putting any time to in your own business?
For instance, if I speak to a specialist, a consultant or something or other and say to them, still today, what do you think of the keto diet, for instance? You say, sorry, I can't advise on that. Like, why? Because we don't know enough as a medical institution yet. So they're often taught stuff from a 20-year-old syllabus that they did 20 years ago. So it's pretty old stuff that they've been trained on. But the thing is, if they listen to every Tom, Dick, or Harry of every single thing that may or may not work on a daily basis, they would not be advising correctly, and they'd be open to getting in trouble advising the wrong things. And I think things like gyms, for instance. So if I look at America, for instance, there's loads of gyms, there's loads of places where you can go and do ice bath, sauna, gym circuit, social, sit down and have a bulletproof coffee as well. And they do very well. There's one I went to in Phoenix recently, and there were just like literally hundreds of people throughout the day, in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. It's taken a long time for them to get to that point where it's readily accepted and known that this stuff works for a lot of people. And then the awareness is there, and then the clients are there. The UK is always behind, 5, 6, 7 years behind the US in many ways. And I think that the best idea is to not integrate things until they've been proven to work for a few years before doing so. Otherwise, we've got a whole database of guinea pigs opposed to people that are actually having the result. And I think we have that luxury in the UK to look at what's happening or working in America. And we
they're our guinea pigs.
So I think it's about, like, for instance, if we look at a lot of places now, they're incorporating hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I was right at the front of that trend back in 2014, 15, and I opened a clinic in 2015 in hyperbaric, and no one else in London had it, no one. And we were full up by 6 months' time, 2 chambers, all day, every day. It was a fantastic little cash cow, I'm not going to lie. But now they're everywhere because people have seen that they work. They see that the outcomes are good with their clients. And now they're rolling out into gym groups and into, wellness clinics and everything. So I think it's about being on the forefront, seeing what works over a period of time, and then incorporating those. And I think the beautiful thing is here, for instance, if we look at hyperbaric as an example, or sauna and ice bath, incorporating those into a gym as an additional, let's say, bolt-on module subscription, you can really increase your revenue quite significantly by incorporating these things that are working. And that's when people start choosing your gym over other gyms because you've got the things that they want, and they've already been tested by the Americans.
We just quickly following up on that, like we talked about methylene blue, which I'd love to share because I've been using it, but I'm a guinea pig. I've tried it for a while, got some interesting results. I know you happen to have used it, and I'd like you to share why you think it's an interesting thing to get involved with. But at the same time, as I started to read some of the research, like there can be some cases where you shouldn't take it, and there's, how much dose do you take? A lot of the companies that are selling it, you don't know the quality of the methylene blue. Like your one you're taking has certain things that I've never even heard of. My one's got silver and gold that I've been told is really cool, but I don't know whether I'm putting metals into my body or anything. I'm just sort of going off. I like to do that, but it's also, I could end up finding in 5 years' time I've created something in my body that I don't even want to have on there. So tell me about methylene blue, but also, someone like me that's a little bit crazy that tries these things. What do I need to be careful of so I'm not doing permanent damage to myself?
I mean, I must admit, there's been a few things along my journey that I've been like, what the hell are you doing? What's the risk to reward here? And I'm like, it's pretty risky, some of the stuff. Certain peptides or things early days before they became more mainstream. I think methylene blue for me was an interesting one, but I didn't know what, the first time I had it, actually, it was given to me by the guys at Troscriptions in the US, which do the troche. And they try methylene blue because it does this, this, and this. So I just went with it. I just thought of it as a supplement. I didn't think that it was anything particularly controversial or effective. And I just thought it gives you a blue tongue. And when you're wearing blue blocking glasses and you've got a blue tongue, you kind of like stand out a bit at an event. So I think there is an element of people taking it without realizing, like you say. But when you know how effective it can be, and I'll touch on that in a second, again, the heuristic of picking a brand that is reputable, like that is well known, that is tested, and not just any brand off of Amazon, because to be honest, if you're buying it off of Amazon, you don't even know if it's just blue dye,
But I just want to go back to that. You talked about incentives for big pharma and healthcare. It's all about money. And yesterday we were chatting. I want to bring up two brands to you that I know you have a reaction to that also are very well funded and are marketing their products. And that is the Apple Watch as a wearable and something which you're a fan of, AG1, which I've moved off of about a year ago, for greens. Both of these brands have done a tremendous job in marketing themselves as health products. And in each category, they are the industry leaders. Apple Watch is the largest wearable company. And AG1, Athletic Greens, is the #1 greens company in the world. It took me a while. I was taking it for about a year. It took me a while to learn about not knowing what's in there. I wanted to be a bit more prescriptive around what I'm taking. So I moved on to another greens product when we started working with them. But how do you manage that? Because the same things that you kind of talked about, money and incentives driving prescriptions and drugs as treatment, is also true in our world as well.
Very true. I mean, I think anyone that's on the journey of taking AG1 is on the journey of health in some description. I don't think, there's someone that's sitting on the sofa watching Netflix, eating packet meals all day, every day is going to be taking AG. And if they are, at least they're beginning to open their eyes a bit. So I would say that it's better than not, for sure. But when you start, it's like, the more you learn, the more you know you don't know. And if you start with AG1, it's a great starting point. And it is a healthier product, for sure. However, when you arrived at, the more you learn about it, the more you realize actually there's healthier options or better options for me. So it's a very well marketed product, but it is doing good, for sure. It's also making some people a lot of money. I mean, there's another case of it, which is LMNT, actually, interestingly. And obviously they're I think pretty much the #1 hydration product out there. They've done extremely well, and yet they use table salt, not sea salt. or rock salt.
Which is something I learned about recently. I actually take Elementi because I switched to them from Noon into that. But that's the challenge that we're in, right? There's a lot of products coming out, and it's after it's released that someone does the research to find out what's in it, and it's hard to navigate that.
It's very hard, but life is hard to navigate. Relationships are hard to navigate. Getting to work is hard to navigate. Everything's hard. I mean, but the thing is, it's how we look at those challenges and how we navigate them. That's it. And I think when it comes to healthier products, you're already taking a healthier product. And I think you're at the beginning of improving in some form. So I would say that when you realize, actually, if you realize there's something better, figuring out what is better and moving on. For instance, David Beckham's brand, IM8, came to me recently, actually, and said, we'd really like you to try this. And I just rolled my eyes thinking, you know, celebrity influencer, name tagged onto it, it's going to be rubbish. And I said to them, send me the details. You know, what form is your B12? And, you know, what form is this, 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 and this? And I dug into it, and I was like, actually, it's pretty well formulated. I was actually impressed. And David is actually one of the co-founders. He's not just some name attached to it to get it big. So I was actually pleasantly surprised that they've taken what AG1 has done and done it better. You know, do I think there's going to be other iterations and other brands doing that? And they all love exposing each other, saying, oh, we're doing this properly, which helps raise awareness of it. So I think it is a problem initially, like with the keto diet, like with Bulletproof Coffee, like with AG1, like with LMNT. But as time progresses, often better versions come out and it comes to fruition. For instance, there's a lot of press around AG1 right now of how it's not actually that fantastic. So it is a problem to navigate, but again, it comes back to common sense, you know. And I think their target market generally does have common sense around health and getting more and more aware of what they should be doing. So if you're taking it and you maybe an upgrade.
Well, we're about to wrap up. I just wanted to ask one more question, really, to allow you to go off-piste and talk about some of the sort of crazier things that you're experimenting with personally. So outside of some of the things that we spoke about, is there anything new in the biohacking world? You were talking about having these injections into your prostate, and like, what's kind of a little bit of an interesting thing that maybe people have not thought about doing yet?
Thanks for that.
I just saw the whole audience squirm.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of those treatments where I was like, what are you doing? Yeah, I'd had prostatitis a few times over the last 10 years, part of my whole health journey. And Ben Greenfield actually spoke about the injections into the prostate, which my urologist had never actually heard of, where they put about a 6-inch needle through your bladder into your prostate and inject methylene blue, ozone, and antibiotics into the prostate, which is actually fantastic. So anyone with prostate issues, I had this done 3 times, and when I was lying on the table, they said, what painkiller do you want? I said, you don't have ketamine by any chance, do you? And it's obviously legal to use there. So yeah, they gave me 50 milligrams of ketamine twice, and I left the planet, saw the divine, had a fantastic journey, came out of it, and it was fantastic. So I highly recommend that. But jokes aside, it is one of those moments where I was like, what the hell are you doing? And have you gone too far this time? The risk was quite high. The reward was fantastic because, you know, it solved those issues. And, you know, traditional medicine just said, no, this is something you have to live with. We just don't know why it happens. So that's an example of a crazy one, which, you know, I'm not recommending anyone do it, but maybe research into it. It's Dr. John Lawrence in Sarasota, Florida. And that obviously ties into methylene blue as well, which is antifungal, antibacterial, donates an electron for the electron transport chain, which is good for the mitochondria, and also, you know, fantastic. If you see what it does to a fish tank when the fish tank needs cleaning, then you know what it does to our body in terms of pathogens. And it's cell selective, so it selects the cells that actually needs to work on and avoids the rest. So it's fantastic. So I think, you know, there's loads of interesting things that are coming out in the biohacking space for sure, longevity space, and new tests that are coming out, such as the new oral microbiome tests that are coming out, or the vagina microbiome for women that have had issues for many years. But a lot of it is more of the same, to be quite honest, because most of biohacking is using technology to reverse the damages that we're having because of technology. For instance, we live in a city and it's filthy air, really bad, and we need hyperbaric oxygen therapy to help oxygenate, or we're not exercising or getting our body temperature or heart rate up, so we have sauna. We're not, we're not living in an outside world like we evolved, so we have ice baths. So there's everything I see these days ties back to nature or what we evolved with in some form, pretty much. Whether it's a new supplement like spermidine or any of these things, it ties back to an original metabolic process or something that we evolved with. There are new spins on things, such as a new, red light device that you can wrap around your neck. Or, I think what the biggest exciting thing for the space is the awareness around it, such as talking here to these guys.
Well, we typically like to wrap up with the key takeaway. It's been so good to speak with you. We want to have you back on the podcast as well as a follow-up, which will be a lot of fun. If there is one thing that the general audience could do to have the most impact on longevity, what would that be?
It's boring, but so simple. Track your sleep and respect your sleep. Don't just tick that box and say, yeah, I slept last night. It's like, make sure you know your sleep better than anything else. And obviously there's things to get to that, such as hydrating properly throughout the day with minerals before you sleep, and winding down and not watching Reacher on Netflix before bed, getting your heart rate up and putting yourself into a stress state. I would say the awareness around respecting your sleep, that it is the #1 longevity hack that you can do. Because if you're sleeping 6 hours and say that you're fine, you're wrong. And you're wasting half your life. And
which is exactly what Kristen Holmes said yesterday too. Same feedback, which is wonderful. Matthew, any key takeaways?
I'm curious about this prostate. I heard it on Ben Greenfield, this prostate injection, and now you've told me, and I kind of feel as though I'm missing out. So I probably need to do a little bit more investigation on that. And
I'm going to let you try that. Let me know how that goes. But look, this has been wonderful. I think for me, it's really about, I've started incorporating for the last about 10 years or so, just little things in my daily life. And it's made not a 2-3% impact, but it's really like 10-15%. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. And just listening to you, trying the methylene blue early today, those are the types of little steps I think people could do. So thank you for all that you do. We appreciate it. I look forward to having you back on. And yeah, thanks.
Thanks very much, Tim.